Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us this morning, everyone. Beyond Becker, we are here to talk about.
Two Band-Aids too. Kiera got two Band-Aids and Ari got two Band-Aids.
We are here to talk about what happens when your children graduate from Becker, whether that be after pre-K or after kindergarten, and what happens next. And even for some of our younger children, that may feel like an eternity, but these years really do fly by. And it really is good to understand the different options that you have for your children. All children are very different. I'm a public of private school all the way through. And before I had children, my husband and I both knew that that is exactly what we were going to do for our children. And we didn't. We ended up doing the private school route, and that's what worked for our children. And also knowing what school is right for your children. Not every school is right for each child. And so it's not uncommon for families to have a child in one school and a sibling in another school. So there are lots of things to think about, lots of things to consider. We have an amazing panel with us today. We have Dee Dee Halpin and Julie Blumberg from Houston School Options. Houston School Options is the premier matchmaker for families to find the school that is the right fit for their child. With over 24 school districts and more than 200 private schools in the Houston area, Dee Dee and Julie have extensive knowledge of the different options that you have for your family. Rob Wise is the Director of Enrollment Management at the Joy School. Rob has been an educator for the past 20 years in public, magnet, and independent schools. He was previously the chair of the theater department at HSPVA, chair of career and technology education, and assistant principal at Friendswood High School, and the director of admissions at Annunciation Orthodox School. He's currently at the Joy School and is well equipped to help guide families through the admission process, which can often feel very overwhelming. And then finally, we have Lynn McLean, who is the founder of Houston Family Therapy Associates. She has helped countless families and children through play therapy, parent coaching, and parenting classes. I personally know many success stories of children and adults that Lynn has helped. It is not uncommon for her to get an email or a phone call from me for advice or guidance. She understands the importance of meeting children and families where they are at and help getting them to the point they desire to be. So thank you all so much for being here. We will be starting with Dee Dee and Julie from Houston School Options.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Blumberg, and I'm here with Dee Dee Halpin. Thank you so much, Sarah and the Becker staff, for organizing this session and sessions to come. Big kudos to you guys to help all of your families stay really informed through this whole process. I heard Sarah say there may even be some people who aren't looking this year, but who are preparing for future years. And kudos to you all as well for being on here and proactive and on top of things for your children. So we're so excited to be here today to talk to you about School Search. Dee Dee and I are educational consultants, which means we help families find schools. We can help at a time of transition. We can help mid-year. We help when families are relocating here. All different needs for our services. And we just are really passionate about the amazing schools that are in Houston. So with that said, we have some good news and we have some bad news. There are so many schools to consider in Houston. And so the good news is we probably have one of the biggest, best, broadest selections of public and private schools in the country. The bad news is that it can be difficult, intimidating, and sometimes time consuming to navigate all of those options. So let's talk about the differences in some of those schools, because the differences can be a little stark. So we have some of the best schools in the country, and we have some truly abysmal schools. And you can't assume that just because a school has the word private or charter or magnet and it's titled that you're going to be getting quality education. So you also can't assume that the little neighborhood school down the street doesn't offer you a quality education. You might be surprised to find a gym right there in your neighborhood, right by your home. And so one piece of advice that we always give our clients is to check your zoned public school. Even if you're certain that you want private school, we are going to always highly recommend that you look there, that you do what you need to do to apply or enroll there, register there, because in the end, that is your only guaranteed option. If you, I'm sorry, family circumstances may change. You may, someone may lose a job. Someone may, a private school that you're planning on going to may lose an administrator and the whole school may fall apart or school may shut down. You just never know. And so you really want to think that you want to be prepared with that public school option, even if you don't think that's where you're going to end up. So we're often asked how to compare one school to another. Every public school has a profile, a Texas Academic Performance Report from the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, as you may hear it called. And that allows you to compare schools side by side in some areas. It compares things like socioeconomic demographics, test scores, attendance rates, school size, class size, the percentage of children identified for programs such as ESL, special education, or even gifted and talented. Each school typically has a summary page or profile on their webpage. So if you're wanting to know more about your zone public school, that's a good place to look.
Something to think about when you're looking at those profiles is that a lot of the information is a couple of years behind, because a lot of it is based on test scores, and due to COVID, there was a year when there was no testing. And then there was the year when the kids were coming back from a lot of them being on remote learning. And so scores are not very stable in some schools. So just know that if you're looking now, you're probably looking at 2019 data. But we know that schools don't make drastic changes typically in a year or two. It's just that everybody's been through a lot. So, so the data is a little bit less secure than it normally is. There's also a nonprofit organization called Children at Risk that puts out a report card grade for each school. Not to be confused with the report card grade that the Texas Education Agency gives schools, but they're typically in line, very close. But Children at Risk really does look at a lot of factors, maybe more than the state system does in assigning report card grades to schools. And when you're looking at those, we're going to recommend you just look at A and B schools. There's probably, one you have access to, because the schools that are, scoring below that typically have, some real issues that your child may not, need. There's very little difference between an A+ and an A and an A- or even a B+ school. You're not going to be able to tell by walking in the door, because some of it could be really fine differences in a certain grade level that didn't quite pass the math test, and in the same numbers as it did in the reading. So if you want to look more closely at those profiles, you may be able to tell why a school's grade is a little bit lower. But if a school is rated A+ or A, then I think you can be very assured that that school is doing a good job with its population. We tell parents to listen to all the people in your life when you're trying to make a school decision. So, your parents, your siblings, your friends, other preschool parents, your neighbors, even just random people that tend to dole out advice to you. you want to listen to them, but you want to be reminded that you are the expert about your own child. So their experience is going to be based on their family or the people they know, and that may not be applicable to your family and your child. Even experts like us, we don't know your child as well as you do. So we're guiding you, not making decisions for you, because we really, put that in your hands. The first thing you want to do is some internet searching and make note of a school's mission statement. That can really tell you a lot about what that school focuses on. If you've ever participated in writing a mission statement for an organization, and I've done it a couple of times, people take a lot of time and every word is chosen very carefully. So you want to believe that mission statement, and it either will align with your own values and goals or it won't. Then make a list of the schools you want to consider more closely. And we recommend you start with a longer, more extensive list of schools and then narrow it down as you put your own parameters on your list. So a school may be too far from home and that gets crossed off. You're going to maybe be looking at both public and private school. Do you want to look at religious and secular schools? The cost of tuition and fees may affect your decision. The size of the school, the class size, the academic pace of the school, of course, can be really important for every child. The social environment, the discipline philosophy, and of course, the academic program. You're going to encounter a lot of acronyms like IB, PYP, Vanguard, GT, Magnet, Montessori. If you don't know what those mean, do some research. Julie, you're muted.
Sorry. One thing that Dee Dee and I want to point out is that you're really lucky, like we said, to be at Becker. They bring you programs like this. Use those Becker teachers and administration as a resource. They know your kids. So when you're determining these lists of schools, they can definitely help guide you as well, what kind of classroom your child does well and what kind of reinforcement your child does well with at school. So it's really important to keep that in mind. So once you've narrowed down that long list of schools that you've looked at online, you really want to start going through the process of applying. So what you want to do is you want to make an appointment to visit and or tour the school. A lot of schools admission season for the private schools is in full swing, we're already saying. So you want to look on their website. They probably have open houses or group tours. You want to make an appointment to go to those things. And what's really great about this year is this is the first year of admission season in the last couple of years that really feels like the schools are letting people back in. We want you to try to see the schools when students are there because you can see a lot, and that wasn't happening in the last couple of years. So hopefully there's a time that works for you to go during the school day. We like to recommend getting on the group tours because one, schools like that, I think Rob would agree, and two, hearing other people's questions can be really helpful for you as well. They might ask something that you're not thinking of. And so we just really hope that this year will be a more normal, if you will, experience for the whole admission process as you're going through that. So however you're able to tour, I think some schools are still offering virtual options if that's more comfortable for your family, but however you're able to tour or observe or explore, we have a few things we want you to consider. So look at the facilities of the school and the upkeep. Look at just the general attitude of the staff and the children, the person giving you the tour and how they interact with other people you pass by, or the friendliness of the office staff when you walk in that school. There's a couple school districts that don't let you pass the front office. And we say to families that are relocating here and they're here for like one day, we say, go say hi at the front office and see how it feels to you. It can tell you a lot about a school. Listen, check out the receptiveness of the staff and as you're asking questions, and see what they have to respond to, how they respond to your questions. Look at classroom configurations. And like Dee Dee said, you have to keep in mind your child. Will this work for my child as I'm touring? Look at the materials that they're using, the text. Is it a highly technological school or is there no technology at all? All things to take a look at. While you're touring, ask questions. We do want to remind you, the group tours are general questions. Some good general questions to ask about are the school's philosophy, their grading or assessment systems. Ask about ancillary programs, meaning fine arts, PE, sports, foreign language, and more. Anything that's of interest to your child, check it out and see if that school offers that. Ask about recess and discipline. Ask about technology. You can ask if your family needs about special programs or services such as AM care or PM care, so before school or after school care, athletic programs, talent-based programs, gifted and talented programs, how they challenge students, how they use speech therapy or tutoring or counseling, outside services that your child might need. Anything like that is a good question to ask on a tour. But if you feel your child has special circumstances, ask to make an individual appointment to discuss things with either the admissions director, the head of school, the division head, whoever it may be, to make sure the school can accommodate your needs before applying. We can't reinforce enough to keep up with application deadlines, including supplementary pieces such as like teacher recommendations, or y'all don't have transcripts for this age, but any kind of extra birth certificates or anything a school may need, those all need to be turned in within the deadline. So make sure to register for necessary testing and anything that the school is asking for. It's all very clear on the websites already for these private schools. Now, usually we know the HISD deadlines by now and the school choice tours, but this year we don't yet. We were in touch with HISD just yesterday, and I know Becker's really good about bringing HISD into you guys as soon as they're ready. But just yesterday, HISD told us that they are revamping their website and they are saying to check back in November. We will be keeping our eyes out way before then and still checking, but just in case they decide they're ready sooner, start checking a little sooner. But what will happen is HISD will have tours where you can visit magnet schools, and then you apply for all schools that you want to apply for, not your zone school necessarily, but the other schools that you want to apply for on the school choice website when that opens. There are times when you may want to apply to your zone school. We can answer more questions to that later. Our social media is a great source for things like this, like when the school choice website opens up for private school tours and open houses as well. We're often given those dates by schools and asked to share them across our social. So on Instagram, it's Houston School Options, and then same on Facebook. So if that's helpful, we would love for you to check it out.
We like to remind parents that when they make this decision, whether it's kindergarten or first grade, it may not be a permanent decision. You're making a decision now based on what you know now, and circumstances can change. So just know that, just give yourself some grace that as you make this decision, you're doing the best you can with what you know now. Sometimes things change and families move or schools lose faculty members or headmasters, and it can change the direction of the school. Family circumstances can change and change whether you're able to access private school or public school. And sometimes a child's development may take a real leap, and you've got to deal with that. And sometimes some deficits may show up that, were too subtle to show up earlier, and that may change things. So don't panic. Just know that you're doing the best you can in the time you're given with the information you have now. And finally, we like to remind all parents that if there was a straight path to Harvard and everyone came from the same kindergarten, then we'd all go there. Every other kindergarten would try to emulate that one. And most of us wouldn't have a job, or Julie and I definitely wouldn't. But we know that there are more than one path to happiness and success. We also know that academic success doesn't necessarily lead directly to happiness either. There are a lot of other factors that go into the decision about what school works for your child. So just remember that you are uniquely equipped to make the best decision for your child, and you are the expert. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Dee Dee and Julie. That was really, really great information. As someone who is going through the process now with a fifth grader going into middle school, I was taking lots of notes myself as a refresher. So I really do appreciate all of that. There was a question in the chat regarding the website. Julie, you both mentioned a website. I know one was Children at Risk, but what was the one specific to HISD?
It's the TEA website. It's I don't have the exact website address. I can pull it up and pop it in the chat, but it's the Texas Education Agency. The Texas Academic Performance Report is what you want to look for.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, I am going to pass the screen over to Rob, who is the Director of Enrollment Management at the Joy School now.
Thank you, Sarah. So like Sarah said before, I've been in both public and private school magnet. So I have a pretty good feel for all of them. And I would just echo what Dee Dee and Julie were talking about in terms of being able to find the right fit for your child. That's a big part of what I believe in with schools. And one of the things that we do really well at the Joy School is helping families find the right school for their child. In addition to my paid roles, I'm also the president of the board for the Houston Area Independent Schools. So that's a consortium of all the independent schools in Houston that are accredited brick and mortar schools. There's other schools that are not brick and mortar that or they're kind of co-op schools, but we do all the brick and mortar schools. So I'm always happy to answer questions that you might have about kind of more specifics about private schools in Houston. That's one of the things that I think is important to know is if you go to the HoustonPrivateSchools.org website, it's a .org, not the .com. That is the place where all of the independent schools in Houston that are part of this consortium post and share out details about their schools, events, those kinds of things. So I'm going to throw that in the chat. And looks like I copied a couple other letters in there, so you can just take that. And then the other thing that I think is important to know is that I'm also on the Enrollment Management Association. I'm a co-chair of the Leadership Council, which is a national, actually it's international council that collects information from independent schools all over the world. We provide a lot of resources for schools as well as parents. So we're kind of the think tank on the national lay of the land for admissions in independent schools. So that's another resource that I would recommend. It's called the Enrollment Management Association, and I'm going to throw that in the chat as well here. So there's information for parents there, and our main goal in enrollment management is helping kids, helping families. The Enrollment Management Association is doing a lot of work to help make things easier for parents. So hopefully some of that will matriculate into Houston as well. As far as applying for schools, having more common applications, you can apply to more than one school at one time, those kinds of things. And you can also find out more schools there too. So the lay of the land in private schools, and one of the things that we pride ourselves on is that private schools have the unique ability to transform students' lives through having a very, very strong sense of self and community. That's not just with the kids, but with the parents as well. The parents are a huge part of everything that private schools do, probably to a fault. We listen to parents, I would say, based on my experience, on a very, very heavy basis compared with other schools. That can be good and bad. If you're a school administrator, you get, great things out of that, and you also get sometimes too much in the weeds with parents. but we do pride ourselves on being able to have those relationships. And then private schools are really interesting because no matter what part of the city they're in, private schools will end up creating a community. And that community is very unique to the school because the school can be selective about one, if it's true to its mission, then it's looking for families and students that really fit that mission. So if you feel like really, really good about a school when you go in, and I would also echo trust your gut. When you walk into a school, how does it look? How does it feel? Are the kids happy? Are the staff happy? You know, is the school clean? Is it well ordered? What's the flavor of the school? What's kind of the ethos of that school? And so when you feel like that's a school that you belong in, then I would trust your gut on that. And if you feel like I can see my child here, or you look around in a tour and you see, oh, that child's just like my child, that's a school that I would definitely recommend you pursuing. Some schools are more competitive than others. The top schools in Houston are the top schools for two reasons. One, because they do what they do really well, and because they've got lots of applicants. So that doesn't mean all the applicants are a good fit for the school, but because of the school's popularity, it ends up, they get lots of applications. So it becomes a really well sought after school. The other thing about that is that that may not be the right school for your child. So it's really important to stay in perspective as a parent and to know your child and know where they are ability wise, and listen to the admissions team when they say, we don't think that we can provide everything that your child needs. I would listen to them because they've seen thousands of kids come through the admissions process. They see thousands of kids at their school. They know what works and what doesn't work for each child. Every admissions process is very granular. So when you go and you apply to a private school, usually there's a requirement that you tour the school or come to an open house. There's testing that's required. Depending on the grade level, that could be anything from like the WIPSI or WISC, which is the scale of intelligence for children. So it's breaking down their IQs into basically 4 categories, and it gives a school a picture of how this child thinks, maybe how fast they can process. Some schools, your child may be very, very bright, but if they are not processing as fast, they may get lost. They may drown in that school. And that's really important to look at as well. The other thing with those tests is that they can help show discrepancies. So if there's more than a 15-point gap between subtests, then there could possibly be a learning difference. And that's some of the things that we look at the Joy School is like, okay, the child looks normal, but they're struggling. And we break down all of the diagnostic things and we look at, okay, here's where the learning difference is. Even if it's not diagnosed, if they're struggling, we can usually tell like it's probably a split between working memory and visual processing and visual spatial reasoning or verbal comprehension and processing speed. So your child may be intelligent, but because of that gap, they're struggling in that gap. And so those are some of the things that the private schools are looking for. A lot of private schools also use standardized testing. They're nationally normed. They tend to be more rigorous than the state standard testing, the STAR test. Private schools don't care about the STAR test on the whole. Their standards generally are a little higher than that. And that's also good to know going into a private school is like, where are the kids in comparison with their peers in public school? So they may be a semester ahead. They may have very specific programs in math and reading that are accelerated, even at younger age levels. So the ability to hone instruction for the needs of the child, private schools can do that a little bit better because they can pivot. One of the great things about private schools is that they're not under any bureaucratic umbrella other than themselves. So the school can be what it wants to be. The school can make changes based on what they're seeing with their students, what they're seeing in educational trends, and with more research. It can change based on what parents would like. If a lot of parents are asking for things from the school can respond very, very quickly. One example that's, as you might know, is with COVID, private schools were able to jump into online instruction very quickly. They had relationships with the kids already. So they were able to, yeah, thanks, Sarah. Can you mute that? It's I work at the Joy School and I have a little ADHD. So if there's something else going on, I'm like, what's going on? A squirrel. Um, so so what we were able to do with COVID is pivot right into online, and to maintain the relationships with students and families. So we didn't lose kids in that process. Now, it wasn't easy. I think, kids suffered social losses because of that. But the other thing that private schools were able to do is decide when they wanted to start back. And some private schools started right back in August on the regular school year cycle in person. They were able to implement strategies very, very quickly over the summer. One, because of their size, and two, because that's what they do. They cater to families and students. So that's just an example of how schools can pivot very quickly, whether it's a pandemic or there's a trend in education that we feel like this is going to benefit our school. We can implement that year or the next year. Schools like the Joy School, we actually pivot in the moment. So if we see like these kids are having an issue with this reading curriculum, we're not stuck to a curriculum. We can jump into a different curriculum that works better for this group of kids. A lot of private schools can do that. They can go, okay, this isn't really working. Let's try something else. As far as the teaching and administration of private schools go, you typically have much lower student ratios, student to teacher ratios. We are a 1:6 and 1:8 student teacher ratio in the Joy School. That's because we do learning differences. It's one of the reasons why we have such high tuition. I don't know if you saw that in the Chronicle, but we won. We had the highest tuition in the city, even over some of the most sought after schools. Most of that's because of our ratios and because we don't keep kids for more than 3 to 5 years. Teachers come to independent schools. There's teachers who have always been in independent schools. And when I say independent, I mean private. They're independent of a governing body. It's not like Houston Independent School District that's just independent of other school districts. We are truly independent. And so they can come from a variety of backgrounds, public, private, industry, and the school has the opportunity to not just find the person with a certification, but find the right person for this job and the right match for the school and what we want to do at the school. If the school's accredited, all the teachers have to meet minimum standards based on what the school set. So usually bachelor's is the minimum in a specialized field. So you might have somebody who is a biologist who comes into private school to teach middle school biology. They don't have a teaching certificate. They may have never taught before, but they're bringing in that professional experience. And if they want to work with kids and they go through this very rigorous interview process, then they end up being phenomenal teachers, and your kids have this benefit of having somebody who's from industry and has the freedom to design their class that's going to be the best for the kids. So the kids tend to get a little bit more freedom from the teacher as far as like, let's try some new things. Let's explore this. Let's do this. They're not stuck to what they have to be tested on later in the year. That's not to say that we don't have standards. I would say private schools have very rigorous standards for themselves. Their accrediting bodies are independent. Usually it's regional. So the Independent School Association of the Southwest accredits the schools in Houston. And it's a very thorough accreditation process. We're actually going through one right now. And so from that, then that accrediting body will make recommendations for the school. The school follows it. And then the school grows and innovates in their programmatic and their school structure and operational structure. Most school searches for private schools come from word of mouth. The second to that would be Google searches, and then referrals from other schools, and then kind of at the bottom of the list is social media. I would encourage you to follow their social media. They look very similar, but it's good to kind of see what programs they offer, what does a school look like kind of on a day-to-day basis. That's helpful to look at social media there. But it's usually something that parents do after they've found the school. They kind of like, okay, is this consistent with what I'm seeing on the website? Is it consistent with the tour? Social media is kind of a backup for schools. Let's see. So the first thing you do, there's certain criteria. So there's a usually visit and a tour. This is where you can get a feel for the culture and environment. I would if they have tours during the day, I would go during the day so you can see the kids. If it's an open house at night, you're going to probably get talked at. You might meet a couple students, but you're not going to get a feel for the culture of the school. That may be all that the school offers, and that's okay. But you definitely want to get in there if you can. One piece of advice I'm going to give you as an admissions director is don't wear the admissions director out. We really are there to serve you and to answer your questions. So it's always, you can always feel like you can ask questions about the school, but don't constantly email admissions directors. Don't ask for private tours if they're not giving them, that kind of stuff. It's unless you have a circumstance where you have to do a private tour if you're coming from out of town, obviously. They appreciate your cooperation with them. And so following the rules, look on the website, look at all of the application guidelines, what they require, timelines. I recommend creating a spreadsheet, have your schools down one side and your columns on the top, what the requirements are, and then just put an X in the box or a date for when that is supposed to happen. The process starts for private schools usually early September and will go through December, sometimes January, if they are on a true admission cycle. So they have an admission season that's finite. They go into committee in February and March, and then decisions are released usually the first week of March. After that, for private schools in the consortium, you have until March 31st to make a decision. So they can't require you to sign anything committing to the school, signing a contract, or financial assistance until March 31st. After that, if you haven't signed, then they can release the spot. We do that as a protection for parents so that you can, if you're on a wait pool in one school and you got into another school and you're still waiting, and then through this flux over about a week, 2 weeks, families are making decisions, then they start opening wait pools, and then that gives you the opportunity, if you come off the wait pool, to be able to commit to that school. So that's why we have that. It's a protection built in for parents. It also helps to provide a place where schools cannot collude. That's a big issue if you've been following any of the college admissions. There's been a lot of collusion. There's been a lot of just, not real good practices. So the other responsibility we have is to make sure that it's always student-centered, it's always family-centered. To communicate with admissions, follow their guidelines. So if you want to talk to them, and the best way is through email them. If they schedule a call with you, then they'll schedule a call with you. But make sure that you're adhering to their guidelines. Some schools are looser than others. Like at the Joy School, if you call us, we're going to pick up and talk, because that's part of our process in the application. Is we're consultants for you, whether or not you come to the Joy School. So if you feel like, well, I don't know if the Joy School is right, but what else would you recommend? We'll have an in-depth conversation about that. Also, if we feel like we're not equipped to serve your child's needs, either because we don't offer the therapies and support that you are needing, or because we feel like your child is beyond what we would do, and then we are going to say, these are the schools we would recommend for your child. Particularly with twice gifted kids, they may have very, very high IQs and maybe a little learning difference, and we may not be able to find a spot in our school that will fit their academic or social needs. So then we'll recommend schools for gifted children that would also take care of their learning difference. And there's a couple of those around town. When you're ready to enroll, if you get an acceptance letter, and again, during the decision process, just be patient. The admissions directors are very, very busy. For 3 weeks, all they're doing is finding spots, making classes, making sure that's the right fit in the class. They're really sculpting what the class looks like. They're casting that class. And so they have very, very specific reasons why they might put one child in, but not another child. They try to balance boy-girl ratios. They try to make sure that the class has a very inclusive feel in terms of the social aspect. So they're looking for kids who aren't all outgoing. They're looking for different kinds of kids. They're looking for diversity in their student body, because more diversity, both neurodiversity and race, ethnicity, life experience, where their family's coming from in town. All of those factors play into how they build those classes out. And they can be very intentional about that. Big schools that are very popular tend to have lots of legacies and siblings. So if you don't get in, it may be because they had a lot of siblings that year, and they're going to give priority to those siblings first. So that's just, what I would say is try not to take it personally. It's very personal, but try not to take it too personally, because they have very intentional reasons why maybe they chose your child, maybe they didn't choose your child to be in that classroom. Once you get an offer, if you are going to commit to that school, if you know that's the school you want to go to, accept it right away. That tells the school that you're in. It helps them out. It establishes that relationship right on. If they have you complete a deposit, so a lot of schools will say they'll give you a contract and then you'll put down a deposit. That's important. If you decide not to go to that school after you've committed, you lose that deposit. That's kind of their reassurance that they can build that class out, because they can't have people dropping in and out through the spring, because it just throws off the whole their whole process. Financial assistance. Most private schools offer some form of financial assistance, some more than others. Their philosophy may be different. Some, it may be that they're trying to provide access to families that wouldn't normally be able to afford private schools. So they may get lots of financial aid for those students. Others, it's accessibility. So, or others, it's affordability. So maybe that you could afford private school, but you just need a little bit more. So they're just making it a little bit more affordable for you. That financial aid process usually starts either before decisions or during the regular admission cycle. So typically around January, you can start applying for financial assistance. I've done this. I've had 3 kids in private school. I have 1 in private school and 2 at HSPVA now. And so it's a fairly straightforward process. It does require you to report taxes, fill out an application. You're telling the school what you can afford. They're putting it through an algorithm that they can't see until after the algorithm's done. And then that company that they use, that's usually third party, kicks out a number saying, based on what the family's reported, this is what we think they can afford. The school has a budget. They look at what you say, they look at what the algorithm says, and then they try to meet you somewhere in there. Some schools and the algorithm, they meet right in line with where you want to be. Others, there may be a bigger discrepancy. So, you can always expect to pay at the minimum what you say you can pay, but usually it's more than that. So you want to plan for that as well. I know families have, a lot of times if there's only one earner in the household and they're applying for financial aid, the school will impugn income. Like if okay, so this person's not working, but if they worked a part-time job, this is about where they would be. And so they may make a financial aid decision based on that. But they're all a little different. They all follow pretty similar guidelines, but when it comes to their budget, they can offer more or less depending on the size of the school, how long the school's been there, what their endowment looks like. So it changes from school to school. One thing that schools cannot do, and this is important for you to know, because this is about collusion, they cannot they cannot talk about with one school to another what they're giving in financial assistance. So if you feel like that's happening, definitely call that out, because they're not supposed to be doing that. I haven't heard of that in Houston, but it has happened in colleges quite a bit, where one school will say, okay, we're only going to offer this much for this family, and they agree to that number. That's collusion. So whatever the schools offer you, don't play them back and forth on your end. You make that decision as a household, and then you decide moving forward. And it can be based on financial aid or based on programming, whatever it happens to be. But that's just an important kind of thing to know about financial assistance. As far as testing goes, you can prepare your children for standardized testing. So if they're taking the Independent School Entrance Exam, the ICE, the SSAT, which is another independent admissions testing, or one of the Catholic school exams, if they're going to a religious school, whatever their standard tests are, I would prepare your child in how to take that test. It may be the first time they've ever seen that format. It may be online. You want to know if it's in person, if it's pen and paper, if it's on a computer. Get your child prepared for the formatting of the test. There are also test prep. Test Innovators is one that's online. That's very easy to use. It's extremely affordable. I think it's like $150. And it's a course where they give you free tests. You take them, it analyzes the time spent on the test, on each question, tells you what to work on, what to practice, and it gives you more practice tests, along with lots of other tutorials and pointers. So that's one that's very easy. It's Test Innovators. And then as far as like any kind of diagnostic testing, like the WIPSI or the WISC, for most independent schools, they can tell pretty quickly if your child has been tutored in those tests, which skews the data. So it elevates the data, and it's not an accurate depiction of your child's true thinking abilities. So be realistic about that and look for schools not that you think you should go to, but look for schools that are going to serve your child best. And the best way to do that is to really understand where your child is cognitively, socially, athletically, all of those factors that you put in as you're looking for schools. So I'm going to also include a resource that's applying to schools in 15 steps. I'm going to see if I can drop that into the chat. I'll drop that in a minute. I was having trouble getting it to share, so hopefully that'll happen. But if not, I'll make sure to email Sarah, or you can email me directly, that's fine. And then I just wanted to let you know that if you are interested in some parent education, on September 22nd at the Joy School, that's next Thursday, we have Dr. Elizabeth McInvale. She's going to be talking about anxiety. And that's a free event at Joy School, so email me and I'll send my email address to you. And then the next one is October 20th. We have Dr. Kimberly Harrison coming in. These are both evening events. They're casual. They'll be, one of the great things about independent schools is that we can serve alcohol at school. So there'll be wine and beer and lots of mixers and talking and socialization. That's a great thing that independent schools do really well, is we like to have events and we like to get parents involved and have them socialize with each other. So we'll have those two events, but I'll throw my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out anytime if you have any questions about our school and what we do. And if you have questions about the Houston private school landscape, I'm happy to talk about those with you. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Rob. And there were a couple of questions. One of the questions was, should we opt to test our child even if a school isn't requiring it?
That's a good question. There are two things that I would say about that. One, if it's an academic test, if you're not, if the school doesn't require it and no other schools you're looking at are requiring an academic test, I don't think you need to do that. If you are looking at a slew of schools and some are requiring it, some are not, you definitely want to have that done. It may just be that you don't report it to the schools that don't require it.
Okay, great.
If you're talking about diagnostic testing, if your child is struggling in school, or you're noticing things that you feel like developmentally your child should be doing, but they're not doing, then it's helpful to get some diagnostic testing. You can start with a very basic WIPSI. It's the least expensive way to just kind of see cognitively where they are. And if you're seeing a more than 15 point gap in between those subtests, then you may want to get some more diagnostic testing, some more involved testing, or you can talk to your pediatrician. You can also email me and I can give you a list of testing referrals that we typically see our kids going to and bringing to the Joy School. We usually get a full diagnostic psychoevaluation from our students. We don't require it, but usually we get it. So we see who's writing those tests and who's writing them well, and which ones are like, it's really hard to discriminate what's really going on. So I can give you a list of testing referrals. And then, yeah, does that answer your question?
Perfect. Thank
Good.
you. And then there was another question, but I think you touched on it, about preparing for the WIPSI, and that is something you really do not want to prepare for. You need to have that
Raw.
data. That's, yeah.
I think the only thing I would say is getting your kids comfortable with going into, the physical, like I'm going into take this test. It's going to be some games. It's going to be going to talk to somebody. They're going to help us understand a little bit more about how you learn things. Just taking that edge off so that they can be relaxed, because kids are relaxed. They're going to do what they're going to do better. If they're stressed and anxious, those cortisol levels are high and they're not going to do as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rob. And then finally, we have Lynn McLean, and Lynn is going to talk to us about best fit for your child and if they're ready for to move on to the next level, or should they stay back, or what type of school should they go to, based on how they are doing. So Lynn, I will let you go ahead and take it away.
Okay. Well, I always have so much fun at this every year. Like I learn things from Rob and Didi and Julie every year. So I hope that y'all are enjoying everything. And I would like to reiterate what all three of them said, which is that take all of this advice and put it in context of what you know about your child and your children, because you know them better than any of us or anybody at any school ever will. And so again, this is going to be just a guideline. What I want to offer you is an idea of what things might look like from your child's perspective. And one of my favorite books is called Planet Kindergarten, and it talks about how different kindergarten is from a typical preschool classroom. Even if you're going from a private kindergarten like Becker, or a pre-K or a bridge at Becker into a different independent or public school kindergarten classroom, like gravity works differently, right? You're supposed to sit in your seat more than you were before. There's all these different things that feel like culture shock to our little humans. And you're already, if you're here, probably thinking about a pretty big shift. So we're going from more of a preschool or maybe a smaller student to teacher ratio into perhaps a bigger classroom. So think of how it might look and feel to your child as you're considering these options. I think we tend to, I'll speak for myself as a parent, we think of where can I get my kid in? Who's going to accept my kid? How are we going to measure up? And usually we're thinking in terms of academics, cognitive abilities. And really what I would love for you to do is look instead at where my child is in a variety of different areas of development. So you're smart, you already know there's cognitive development, there's social emotional, and there's motor development. And kids can have, as Rob mentioned, gaps in some of the same areas of development between different facets. So you have this gut about what's happening with your child and what kind of a need that they have. And so really be thinking in terms of where they're going to come from as you're considering the best place and the best placement for them in the following year. Having said that, now I'm going to tell you the kid that you have with you today is really different than the kid that you're going to have moving into their new classroom in August. So consider that development is happening all the time. Please don't panic if your child is mastering all these areas and they're looking like they're just cooking on all burners, and then somehow in one area they regress. What we know is that progress and mastery in one area can absolutely suffer and be experienced as a regression when a child is getting ready to advance in another area. So the classic example of this is when they're infants and they're sleeping through the night, and then they get ready to start crawling or cruising and walking. Well, they stop sleeping. Their little brains are working on something new, and so they lose that mastery of sleeping the way they did. So think about this. It can be emotional. So it's not uncommon for us to hear about kids who are having emotional meltdowns when they were usually like really happy. And you say, okay, well, what are they working on in school? Oh, you know what? They're kind of stressed about math concepts. It could be that, they can actually have a hard time. So as you're thinking about how they're developing, don't panic. If you've got them on a track for academics and you think like you're good and then they regress, don't panic. It doesn't mean that all is lost. It just means they might be getting ready to surge forward in another area. I want to talk about some areas of different development, physical, social, emotional, and academic cognitive development that we professionals and teachers, we tend to just take for granted. But I don't know that parents always think of them, because we think if you're at a great school like Becker, kids tend to just kind of get these things seamlessly, and we see them happening. But schools might be looking and might be interested in knowing some of these things. Or if you're wondering like, oh, are they doing this? It can help you make a decision about next best step for them. So in physical development, we think about fine motor. So it's little things like, how do they hold a pencil or a crayon or marker? Do they like to draw? How is that looking to them? Can they use scissors? That was a big one for me as a mom of little kids. Think about their gross motor. Rob touched on this. You know, they're athletic. Can they jump, run, throw a ball? Do they enjoy that stuff? How does it look? What is the fit for that at the next grade level or the school that you're considering for your kids? A huge one, y'all, to pay attention to is self-help. So how can they handle things? Can they identify when they need to go to the restroom? Can they manage that themselves? It's not uncommon for us to see little ones who do seem like they're really on target in a preschool classroom. Well, kindergarten and the next step up, that can look a little more challenging. So thinking about that. Are they willing and able to carry their own backpack, their own lunchbox? Will they open their own lunch containers? All of these are things to think about. Usually they can develop these skills, but the willingness is something that I want you to sort of have on your radar as you're considering the next best step for them. Think about their attention level. So can they sit still? Will they listen to a whole book? Will they eat a snack while they're listening to something else? Your teachers are a great resource for this. They can give you feedback about what's actually happening in the classroom. Home might not be the best litmus test for this, but your teachers are going to be a really good resource for you in this. Also think about, because some of you have really little kids, think about their stamina. Can they get through the day without a nap? I can't tell you how many times at the first day of school, kindergartners, they are wiped out because they're not used to going all day long without a break. So think about that. If your little one is just really consistently still needing that nap before they can get on to the rigors of the afternoon, consider that and think about how they will adapt to a different planet when they get to a higher level. So with regard to social and emotional development, some of the milestones that we look for, especially in assessing their readiness to move up, is separation. So how are they at being separated from parents or other family members? Are they pretty independent? Think about how they calm themselves. I think of this as coping skills. So can they calm themselves down if they feel worried, if they get mad? How does that all go? So think about that. Think about peers. Do they get along with peers? Do they want to play with kids? How do they manage that? How does that look to you on the playground with kids they don't know very well? So we're going to be looking at those kinds of things. Directions, will they follow directions from adults who are not you, or will they follow directions from you and not other adults? So these are the kinds of things we want to pay attention to. What are the discrepancies and where are they showing up? You want to think about if they can delay gratification. So what this looks like in practice is, can they stand a peer telling them no, they don't want to play blocks with them? Can they stand you saying you have to wait for your dessert? Can the teacher tell them, yes, absolutely, you will get to go play at centers. First, we're going to do circle time. How does that go? That's a skill. They're not bad because they can't do that yet. They just haven't mastered it yet. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but if I get disappointed about something, it can take me a minute depending on my fatigue level. So, you know, our kids are the same. So thinking about that in terms of what will be expected of them in the area that you're wanting them to go. Also, what their confidence is. So are they going to be confident in expressing their needs and their wants to an adult other than you? So that's going to be another important skill for them to use in kindergarten or the next highest level. Academic and cognitive development. My guess is Becker is an amazing little school in getting kids ready for things. I care less, and my guess is that your school admissions folks are going to care less about what they've mastered and more about what they're interested in. Do they want to learn? Are they paying attention to different concepts? One of the tricks that you can use, we see it all the time in the play therapy room, is kids are, they're practicing. They're practicing concepts. They're practicing numbers. We have a play cash register. Oh my gosh, kids are all the time like, it's this, they're writing numbers down. Well, I know that they're really interested in figuring these things out. So pay attention to that, because your kids are going to give you clues about that as well. And it's more information than can just be measured on a test. So that's a great clue for you. Another big one is problem solving. So do they have the confidence? Do they have the emotional perseverance to stick to something and keep figuring it out? And alternatively, do you have the patience and the emotional wherewithal to let them figure it out? Because that's a huge one. So really think about these things, because they're going to have these skills to be able to really master moving into a level that requires more from them. Okay. If you are really kind of on the fence, you're like, yeah, no, we have most of these things, but I have these questions. Again, your child's teacher is going to be very helpful, or the resources that you've already heard about. So Dee Dee and Julie, if you're really thinking about, oh my gosh, I really don't know, they're a great resource. We send a lot of families to them. And as Rob mentioned, the independent school admissions folks, they really are motivated to get your kids to the right spot. So rely on the experts who are out there ready to answer your questions. So then so it's the classic question of if you should hold your child back if they're a late summer birthday. Should you hold them back? Should you not send them to kindergarten? And that's sort of the age-old question. I would love to say that it's going to go away, but I don't think it is. So one thing to think about as you're considering that particular circumstance, think about how your kids are going to do as they move through their academic years. So in general, I'm just going to tell you flat out that you are never going to do your child a disservice if you give them an extra year to gain maturity socially and emotionally. Again, social and emotional confidence and a strong foundation is going to set the tone for their academic and cognitive development, period. So it's anybody is going to tell you that. And so that will be the place that I would really want you to think about as you're thinking about if you're going to send them forward. There are some parents who want to hold their kids back because they want them to have an advantage. So they want them to be older than other kids and have an advantage academically, cognitively. We tend to see research that academic advantages tend to peter out by about the third grade. So if you think your child is really like firing on all cylinders and ready to roll and they're on the young side, but you really think that they're ready to go, probably they're not going to maintain those advantages past the third grade. That's what studies show us. If on the other hand, you really think that, no, actually they would do well just to have a little extra time, we do tend to see that their focus, their attention, their ability to really engage cognitively, it's well served by giving an extra year for that social and emotional development. So it's a tricky situation, but in general, I'm going to say they do well if you give them some time if they need it. If you do decide that you're going to wait before sending your child on to kindergarten, really give them other tasks to do, keep them engaged. If they're in a preschool like Becker, you feel like, they could use a little extra zhuzhing, like maybe they're getting a little bored, talk to your child's teacher, get them some ideas, give them tasks and chores at home to develop those skills about, really having that independence and willingness and excitement about doing things for themselves, because it's only going to serve them well. And to echo, what my colleagues have said, we are here, HoustonFamilyTherapyAssociates.com. If you ever want to just touch base, we can help be on your team and let you know if a further evaluation might be a good idea, what some of the letters and considerations mean. It can be a really confusing time. And I think I've found year after year, there are a lot more resources out there than it can feel like there are. So we're happy to be in that line if it's helpful for y'all.
All right, thank you so much, Lynn. It was all great information. I can, just a personal note, my daughter has a late summer birthday, and so we always question that too. And what I found is that you really don't know until they get to middle school. And it wasn't, I felt like socially she was great to go on to kindergarten. And in middle school was when it was all of the sudden I realized that physically she was much farther behind than her peers. And she's done great and she's done fine. But as Lynn said, you're never doing a disservice to your child by giving them another year to get ready. You could be doing a disservice if you push them ahead before they are ready. So that's my little story. I'm going to open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask the question, or to use the little hand feature to raise your hand, and we will get, or you can put it in the chat.
I have a question. So I understand kind of the buckets that we talked through about, like the development buckets and sort of how, you know, when considering whether to hold them back or not hold them back. But I guess I continue to struggle with, or maybe it's just an anxiety I have myself around, like, when we talk about knowing our child the best, like what questions should we be asking ourselves about them? Because, you know, I mean, my daughter goes to Becker 9 to 4 or 9 to 5. And so I don't really see, especially the last couple of years, like we don't really see them as much in the classroom with other students, and kind of like not sure where the barometer of how is she doing comparatively speaking. And I know we can get that sort of from parent-teacher conferences, but what else should we be kind of like asking ourselves about them?
You can also get some of that information from your friends. And, you know, it's just natural to compare kids. So, you know, if your friends are saying that your child is really, you know, ahead of mine, or seems to be able to do things mine can't do, you know, listen to the feedback that you get from everybody around your child. Because yeah, you're not with him or her 24/7. So, you know, anybody that is, if the child participates in sports or in some kind of other activity, get some feedback there about how they're performing, you know, compared to the other children. Just keep your ears open.
I think also 9 to 4 is a long day, right? I know that the 7:30 to 3 o'clock jump for my daughter to kindergarten, and she's not a summer birthday, was a big jump. So how is she handling that day? And definitely feedback from your teachers would be, and Sarah would be a huge piece of that. But how is there a collapse at the end of the day? Is she talking about her day? Is she sharing what's happening and able to verbalize it? Those are good metrics too.
And I think also zooming out and considering some of those like discrete tasks that I talked about that we don't always think about our kids. So as Dee Dee was saying, like extracurriculars, oh, okay, well, take a look. Is she independent? Is she doing these things that you would think, and zooming out and seeing in context of what somebody who doesn't know her might be observing, that can help give you some clues too, I think.
Thank you.
Sarah, to reiterate what you were saying about, you know, your child going to middle school, as someone who has 3 children who have now gone through both college and postgraduate work, I can tell you that, you know, when they're young and they're immature, it stays with them at all those stages. So at the point where my oldest child graduated from college, it was like, oh my gosh, already, like already she's out in the world and she's really having to negotiate things that I don't know if she's ready for. It wasn't an option at that point for her to have stayed another year, but she graduated from college early. She didn't need to do that. So, you know, we have never in the years that Julie and I have been practicing, and I've been practicing a lot longer than she has, we've never had a family regret giving extra time. We have had families who came to us after the decision not to wait and have regretted it later.
Yeah,
And I don't, I'm sorry, Rob.
sorry, I can speak to that too from an admissions perspective, that a lot of schools already have deadlines for when they have to be 5. That may be midsummer, so that may take some of the decision making out of it for you. And I would say that for girls in particular can mask academic difficulties for a long time. A lot of the girls that we get at Joy School come in 3rd and 4th grade because they're not a behavior issue, because they're not frustrated. They just they're frustrated, but they're internalizing it and kind of shutting down, but they don't look like they're having a hard time. Boys tend to get more rambunctious when they're frustrated or when they don't understand something. So boys, it's a lot easier to see that early on. And girls going into 3rd, 4th grade, when that instead of reading to learn, you're learning to read, or instead of learning to read, you're reading to learn, and you're having to comprehend and then apply. That's where it starts to fall apart. And you may not see that, but then in middle school, absolutely, I would say both for boys and girls, if they're on the younger end coming into middle school, we really see that academic gap start to really happen. And then there's usually a social component to that as well. I was 17 when I went to college. Should not have happened. I have an August 30th birthday. My mom's an educator. She drove me, but I struggled in math from probably 7th grade all the way through 2 years of college. And so just in that perspective, academically, it would have been much better for me to be held back a year.
We also talk to parents about thinking about when a child starts to drive, when they start to date. There are a lot of things that kids may not be ready for if they're too young or too behind maturity wise.
And I just want to give a shout out to Becker, because with the Becker kindergarten, or what used to be Bridge, I know they're different programs, Sarah, but it does buy you another year to think about it. So I don't know what age your child is, but they can guide you through that as well with the Becker kindergarten program.
Absolutely. And we will have a later preview of that Becker kindergarten program where parents will be invited to come in and experience that class for themselves. So you can learn more about that at a later time. We will also be doing our HISD FATs in November, more than likely, because there isn't really anything to do at this point. So that if you are considering that public school option, it can sometimes be more overwhelming than applying to private schools. And we'll have more information about all of that in November too. All right, are there any more questions? Just as a reminder, this is recorded, so we will be sending it out to families if you know of anybody who missed it, or if you want to go back and watch it again, because there was so much amazing, useful information. As a reminder, we are all here to support you. You as parents know your child better than anyone else. Their teachers are a very close second, and they really see them in a different way and in a different setting than you do at home. So they are also always here for you. You don't have to wait for parent-teacher conferences. You can set up conferences or chats throughout the year. All of our presenters this morning left their information in the chats. I know that I'm going to be sending you all some information from Rob as well that he emailed me. So be looking out for that as well. Thank you all for joining us this morning.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
you,
Sarah.
everyone.